Hi guys, it's Tara from Sojourn Psychology, and I'm here with Ellis Chan, who is a registered psychologist on our team. Another cool thing about Ellis is that he is a PhD candidate, so that's something that we don't often talk about, but it's really impressive. As we hear a lot of buzz or a lot of people talking about CBT. When you're considering going for psychological care, people will say you should try out this CBT thing. And Ellis, this is something that you're well versed in. So what is CBT?
Yeah, thanks, Tara. So CBT is an acronym, three letters, cognitive behavioral therapy. So the cognitive aspects referring to our thought patterns, behavior is referring to our behavioral patterns. And then when we look at this, we're looking at maladaptive patterns that might be cognitive or behavioral, and how that they in turn are affecting our overall moods. So my goal as a therapist would be to analyze those different patterns and see if there's anything that might actually be maladaptive and if we can change or challenge those patterns.
Cool. Okay. And so, in your opinion, Ellis, why do you think that CBT has such notoriety or it's so well received?
Yeah, so I think CBT, there's a couple of reasons. I think probably the first one, it probably fits better with a clinic a hospital model in terms of evidence-based practice. And so one of the things that I always want to emphasize over here is that it's not that CBT is the only evidence-based practice. Other therapy models do have evidence-based as well, but it's probably the one that is it's more easily evaluated and it fits better within that system. They in comparison to other different therapy modalities. So it probably sits a little bit better. And so that's often I think why I hear it being pushed a little bit more in hospital clinic settings. The other one, I think, is that if we look at timing, CBT aims for kind of maybe a shorter term duration, not unlike other things that might be like short term therapy in itself, but that it's more concrete in that sense. So I think that it sits better where in systems where it's very time constrained and there's limited access to clinicians. That would probably be my personal um, experiences about why it's pushed out more. Again, your therapist may use other different modalities of therapy, and and they can be just as effective. It's just that it's more CBT tends to be adopted more on a wider scale in clinic settings.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of saying it. And I know there are other highly reputable modalities like emotionally focused therapy has a lot of research or EMDR. But again, with CBT, there's some nice features like there's this measurableness with CBT. You're going to have homework with CBT. And those are things that can really work for people. So for you, who do you see CBT working with very well?
I find CBT, I especially like it when I'm working with people who have certain thought patterns that are very recognizable. I find that when you get stuck on certain thought patterns that you ruminate over, and they typically the ones that I run into, they cause either sadness, anxiety, or anger. Typically, the big ones are probably anxiety. Actually, that's probably maybe my number one that I run into personally, where I'm dealing with like whether this would be a good fit for CBT, because I find that if the patterns are recognizable, it's more easily challenged. Um, and so it fits a little bit more concretely with that model.
Okay, cool. And it works well with like kids, teens, adults.
Yeah, so I mean, I definitely I think like as you get older and your cognitive capacity develops, it definitely is a better fit. So typically, like I wouldn't be doing cognitive behavioral therapy with like a preschooler. I wouldn't find that as effective. There are other therapy models that would be better fit for that age. But as you get older, certainly I've done CBT with elementary kids, junior high, high school, adults, parents. It works well in that age range.
Cool. And then when you're talking about like ruminating thoughts, repeating thoughts, or these sort of patterns that are showing up for us, what is an example of something that you might do from a CBT, cognitive behavioral orientation, to address that?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I think like there's different ways that we might attack thought patterns. So we might like one might be show me the evidence. So like if we have a maladaptive thought pattern that says that I'm embarrassing. So do you actually feel, are you actually embarrassing? Have you done something? Is there evidence that actually shows that you're embarrassing? Or is that something that's more residing in your emotions? So we might challenge something like that. But even before we do a challenge, I think the more important one actually, if not the most important part of this, is actually recognizing the thought patterns exist. Because if you can't recognize the thought patterns exist, then you can't actually challenge it. They just continue uninhibited. One of the things that I really like to think about is the example. If you've worked with me, one of the examples I use a lot is fish. So over here we have a Nemo fish, a clownfish. But when we look at fish, fish swim in schools, and they swim in schools for a reason. It's defensive. And one thing is that their overall shape is larger, and that's more intimidating. But another thing is that for a predator, like let's say the shark, it's a lot harder to track as they swim in and out of each other. So as the fish swim in and out of each other, it's a lot harder for a predator to actually track that. And so akin to your thought patterns, as your thought patterns are swirling all around in and out of each other, it could be some anxiety, it could be anger, it could be sadness. It's actually really difficult to know what you're actually dealing with. So one of the things that I typically will start out with first, before we even think about challenging thought patterns, is recognizing them. And then, so that's also something that you'll often run into in CBT. They'll ask you to do like a thought logbook of some capacity where you're writing down your thought patterns each day as you start to feel dysregulated or something like that. And that's probably maybe the more important part, because once we can identify it, we can like be precise about it. Then we know what we're dealing with, and then we can actually challenge it. So that's probably one of the first or maybe most useful things is if you can name it, you can tame it. It's probably one of my favorite lines. It's from Dr. Siegel, I believe. He's a child psychiatrist. And I use that a lot because if I can recognize the thought pattern, then I can do something about it.
That's cool. And I love the metaphor of the fish too. That's a different way of naming it. To tame it is this visual of how our thoughts and our feelings kind of swirl up together, and it can be really hard. So CBT is really a strategy of sort of moving these pieces apart so that we can manageably approach them and understand them.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's cool. Really, really cool, Ellis. So thank you for talking about CBT. Any final thought or closing thought for us?
The closing thought probably would be really just that if you can name it, you can tame it. I like to keep it nice and simple. And then so I think like if maybe one of the most effective things is that self-awareness. Because if we can be self-aware, we can recognize when those thought patterns are starting to come into fruition, then we can actually do something about it. So that would probably be my biggest one, if that's maybe one of the most important chunks for me as a therapist.
Yeah, I like it. That's something that we can remember and we can use. So thanks again, Ellis. And I'm sure that you'll be showing up on our feed here again down the road. So thanks, Ellis. Bye.
Thank you, Sarah. Bye.